25 years, sir. Dr. Agarwal, sir, your presentation will be on right now.
Padma, you have my presentation.
Yeah, sir.
Please put it on.
Yeah, we are just sharing, sir.
Good evening, friends. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Padma Kumar for asking me to deliver this lecture. In next 15 minutes, I am going to talk about the laparoscopic surgery progress in last 25 to 30 years. The first laparoscopic cholecystectomy in India was done 30 years ago in July 1990 in Mumbai by Dr. Tempton Udvadia. I did my first lap chole in January 1991 without the camera, looking through the eyepiece of the telescope. For next 3 hours, my assistants did not know what was happening till the gallbladder came out. The progress since then has been tremendous, mainly because of the support of the industry and the innovations of the laparoscopic surgeons in India and around the world. The progress of the endo camera has been phenomenal. We used to initially use surveillance camera with the coupler attached to it. Now we have single chip, then we had 3 chip, HD, full HD, 4K camera, 3D camera, and even camera with near infrared light to do the ICG scan are available now. The CO2 insufflators has also kept pace with the innovations. I remember my first insufflator used to be a tank of 9 liters to be refilled repeatedly during the procedures. Gradually, newer models were introduced, initially 10 liters, then 20 liters, and now we have 40 liters insufflator to do bariatric surgery. Heating of CO2 was introduced to prevent fogging of the lens. We have insufflators now with the filters which take care of the smoke and plume in this COVID era to prevent infection of the virus. These are the high-end smoke evacuators which are being produced by the manufacturers to take care of the plumes. We progressed from lap chole to appendicectomy. This was easy. Lap appendicectomy was the good training ground for the young surgeons, as the chances of complications was much less and the disease prevalence was much higher than the gallbladder. Next progress was in treating groin hernias and midline hernias. Dr. LeBlanc published a monogram in 1992 on the lap hernias, and that helped us a lot in mastering the technique of hernia surgery. The first tacking device was a 12mm trocar tacker of the J&J, which was angulating as well. Gradually, more complex ventral hernias were tackled laparoscopically. 2 associations, namely Hernia Society of India and Indian Hernia Society, were formed. They help in promoting lap hernias through various conferences. Various authors published monograms on hernias and guidelines of hernia surgery were formulated. Various improved tacking devices, including absorbable and angulating tackers, are now available very easily. This is the literature published by the Indian authors, mainly Dr. Palanivelu, Dr. Chobe, Dr. Bhatia, and various others, to talk about the hernia surgery. The progress of energy devices made more complex surgeries possible with greater safety margin and saving surgery time. From monopolar, we moved on to the bipolar. Newer energy sources in the form of ultrasonic shear was introduced that facilitated laparoscopic surgery to a great extent. Combination of 3 energies in the form of hybrid energy devices was also introduced for lap surgery. Now we have NSEAL, LigaSure, Thunderbeat in our armamentarium to perform complex lap surgeries with ease. Initially, the knotting and suturing in laparoscopy was very difficult. Gradually, a progress was made in knotting and suturing. Initially, I remember we used to use black ski needles to perform the suturing laparoscopically, but now various needle holders, various needles and knotted sutures are available. Noteworthy in this was a book written by Dr. Jordan Jabo, who was the pioneer of knotting and suturing. I had the privilege of calling him to Mumbai in 1993 for the first Nottingham suturing workshop at KEM Hospital, my alma mater. Auto Sutures introduced the endo suturing device and they named it as Endo Stitch, which is still popular with many surgeons. It made suturing possible at odd angles in situations, for example, RYGB and difficult laparoscopic surgeries. In 1993, a National Association of Laparoscopic Surgeons was formed. It was named Indian Association of Gastrointestinal Endosurgeons, IAGES. I was appointed as a founder secretary of that. The first national conference was held in Delhi, and Dr. M.C. Mishra, our founder of CELSI, was the scientific secretary then. Second conference was held in Mumbai, and I was organizing secretary. More than 400 delegates and 12 international faculties attended that conference. Two more associations were formed subsequently, namely AMASI in 2003 and CELSI in 2008. GI staplers were introduced by me in India in the year 1982. Initially, due to the extra cost, they did not become popular. As their utility was realized, surgeons started adopting them mainly for low anti-resection and Sugura procedure for portal hypertension. Once the endo staplers were introduced, they help in performing complex GI surgeries with ease, particularly the colonic surgeries and gastric surgeries. Now we even have a power-driven staplers to facilitate easy firing. Bariatric surgery was introduced in our country in 2002 by Dr. Dore Patil from Pune. In association named Obesity Surgeons of Society of India, OSI, was formed in the year 2003. Gradually, more progress was made in this field and more complex bariatric surgeries were performed. Since the introduction of sleeve gastrectomy, the number of bariatric surgeries have increased, and because of this, the bariatric surgery has become more popular. Now we even have endoscopic sleeve gastrectomy. Along with bariatric surgery, metabolic surgery also came into the armamentarium of laparoscopic surgeons. More complex surgeries were performed. The most complex of this is the ileal transposition, IT. Even that is performed laparoscopically. Imagine taking care of 3 anastomosis with 6 loose ends of the bowel during laparoscopic surgery, but that was accomplished. Now we even have a hybrid technique. Dr. Padma Kumar does the sleeve gastrectomy through laparoscope and then opens the patient up and finishes the ileal transposition in an open method very quickly. Gradually, laparoscopic surgeons started performing cancer surgeries. The beginning of cancer surgery was only diagnostic laparoscopy and staging laparoscopy. The first single theme conference of minimal invasive surgery in malignancy was organized in 2003 in Mumbai at Lilavati Hospital. Most complex Whipple's resection laparoscopically was also attempted and performed successfully. And today we can boast about having the highest number of laparoscopic Whipples performed all over the world, and that is by Dr. Palanivelu, and that is the initial publication of Dr. Palanivelu. Laparoscopic surgeons started venturing into tackling thyroidectomy endoscopically. Various approaches were devised, namely posterior neck incision, axillary, transcellular, abdominal wall, and supraesternal. Now we even have transabdominal approach. Even thyroidectomy for malignancy and large tumors are being performed endoscopically. I have witnessed Dr. Padma Kumar performing large thyroid surgery endoscopically. To reduce the pain of the multiple ports and give better cosmetic results, surgeons started single port lap surgeries. A single theme SILS conference was held in Mumbai some time back. From simple appendicectomy to colectomies, TAPP, etc., we progressed to perform sleeve gastrectomy, RYGB, and complex surgeries, including colectomies, in a single port. Industry also kept pace with us in devising many varieties of ports, telescopes, articulating and flexible instruments. Concept of AWR, abdominal wall reconstruction, was introduced in this decade to treat complex large hernias with loss of domain. With the newer concept of muscle release was introduced, Dr. Yuri Lubinsky suggested transversus abdominis muscle release and called it as TAR to achieve midline closure and create a new linea alba. ETP helped further in promoting AWR. All this can be done laparoscopically. Many centers are routinely doing this type of surgery. These are two publications of ours recently in 2020 on AWR. Hepatopancreatobiliary surgery has made tremendous progress in last decade. Hepatic segmental resections were performed and mastered gradually. Gradually, more complex liver resections are being performed with the help of newer energy devices. Even donor hepatectomies are routinely done in some centers in India. Robot has given us an extra boost to laparoscopic surgeons with three-dimensional vision, elimination of tremors, 360 degree of motion, and ease of sitting on the console and performing surgery has made complex surgeries possible. An association of robotic surgeons was formed recently named Clinical Robotic Surgeons Association CRSA. Initially, due to cost of Da Vinci robot, it was limited to some centers. With more companies coming with staplers, with simpler and cheaper version, it will become more popular, I am sure. Friends, in last 25 years, we have made tremendous progress, and I am sure with the newer innovative instruments coming in, we are going to make much further progress. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Agarwal sir, for the nice exposition of what has been actually the progress of laparoscopy in the 25 years. So nice of you to mention our team name in regards to hybrid and endoscopic thyroidectomy also. So over to chairpersons, Dr. Maurya, Dr. Subodh, Mishra sir is there. He is also part of that history. Mishra sir, your mic is muted. Sir.
Improvement technology to actually track cases so that if we flatten the curve, we can exit around this by actually testing.
Somebody else sound I'm just hearing.
Been infected and now sending it back to work. When new cases arrive, as happens in Singapore, we come back with
So
infections.
Mishra sir, sound is not coming that much. Dr. Vinod Kumar, our chairperson, can you make a comment? Dr. Vinod?
किसी का comment ही नहीं आ रहा.
Yeah. Vinod, your voice is coming. Just can you go ahead?
अभी आए.
Yeah, please. Sir, his voice is not coming. Even Dr. Mishra's sound is not coming. Anyway, we are extremely thankful to you, sir, for the excellent disposition on the 25 years of history of laparoscopy. We just thought we'll share some pictures of previous year's conferences where all of you actually came this side during our programs, and we were just showing some pictures of the training labs also, which we are associated at Enappa Medical College on the background. Sir, thank you so much, Dr. Agarwal sir, for being with us to deliver this talk on laparoscopy in the last 25 years. Thank you. Excellent talk, excellent disposition, sir. Shall we go ahead with the next lecture? That is by Dr. Ishwara Murthy. He is the president of IAGS. He is consultant GI surgeon at Lotus Hospital, Erode. He has been closely associated with our programs. Especially, you can see his picture actually coming on the background, training the surgeons to do endoscopy. And we are extremely happy that Dr. Ishwara Murthy is joining us. We have a set of new chairpersons also, Dr. P.K. Mohanan, senior from Thrissur, Professor of Surgery at Amala Medical College, Dr. Sulfikar MS, Professor of Surgery at Trivandrum Medical College. Then we have Dr. Sudhanshu Sutar from North India. So all of them are chairing the session. We have topic Tips and Tricks of Upper GI Endoscopy by Dr. Ishwaramurthy. Can you go ahead?
Respected moderators, dear delegates, I bring greetings from IAGS. Thank you, Padma Kumar and Madhukar Pai, for this wonderful virtual conference on MISCON. I've been asked to give a 10 minutes overview on performing a good upper GI endoscopy. What I can offer to the young surgeons, and here are the top 10 tips for making an endoscopy very easy to do and also a very nice way of not to miss any lesion. First important tip is try to invest money on a good high definition endoscopy. Whether it is Olympus, Pentax, Fujinon or any other company, doesn't matter. What you need is actually a high definition endoscopy with a higher number of pixels, so that whatever images you see, unlike a standard definition, in high definition, as you can see, the images are much richer in color, sharper, with all the features clearly seen. And also, there are some additional advantages of image enhancement technique, like narrow band imaging in Olympus, and also intelligent scan in Pentax, and SPICE in the case of Fujinon. So that what you see when you do a white light endoscopy, you may sometimes miss a very tiny sessile lesion, which can be easily seen thanks to the image enhancement, magnification, and higher definition. You will be able to clearly see the lesion. Before the era of this electronic chromo endoscopy, we tend to do a white light endoscopy along with some spraying with some iodine or methylene blue. That is called chromo endoscopy, which is very cumbersome. So nowadays, thanks to the electronic, the chromo endoscopy, now we are able to understand about the pathology, even without the availability of the histology of the condition. That is what we call in situ histology you are able to make. The next important tip is what a pilot does before he starts playing, that is performing a cockpit drill. Like that, before you take the scope and put it into the patient mouth, ensure the equipment is in good order. The processor is on with the image you are able to see on the monitor, and you check all the buttons so that the suction, insufflation, water instillation, everything is working fine. You don't want to check in the middle of the procedure, because the procedure hardly takes about 5 to 10 minutes, and at that time you should not have any hiccups if you do this cockpit drill beforehand. The next important thing is check also, not as a technician but as a clinician, why are we doing in this case? If you have a background history of the patient, like this is a patient with the upper GI bleeding requiring a endoscopy, then what are the likely pathology you are able to imagine? Like this patient may have a esophageal varices or an ulcer, and if they don't have any of these, then you can see carefully some areas, like areas normally missed, like a posterior duodenal wall, fundus of the stomach, not to miss all the rare conditions. So it's very, very important to know the possible indication, and also you should know when not to do, and the patient's comorbidity and also the drugs they are on. Like for example, some patients on cardiac like drugs like warfarin, if they are on, best thing is to not to do endoscopy, and even if you do, make sure you don't attempt a biopsy, especially if they don't stop it for at least for 3 to 5 days. Informed consent is a very important legal document before every endoscopy. Fasting for 6 hours is very important to avoid the risk of aspiration. All those things you teach your nurse to do before you start doing the procedure. And when we try to attempt to do the procedure, the third important step is understand these 3 important things. One, of course, the monitor right in front of you, you treat it like a clock, 3, 6, 9, 12, like that. And you see the trajectory of your instruments you are taking inside through the access channel. Normally in Olympus, it comes around 7. If it is in the Pendex, it might come at 5 o'clock. Okay, this is equally important, and also the pathology where in relation to the monitor is seen. And if they are in the bottom half of the monitor, it is easy to take a biopsy. And if they are in the top half, it's very difficult to do any intervention. So you may have to do what we call the torquing or twisting of the scope in order to bring a lesion which looks hanging at 12 o'clock. They are now at the bottom, so it's very easy to remove them. The second important thing is you have to have how to embrace the scope with your left, that is a non-dominant hand, with allocating 2 fingers, that is the index and middle finger to the buttons, how you embrace with the other fingers, how you engage your thumb for moving this big wheel, small wheel, either towards you or away from you. If you move this big wheel towards you, which is the most important movement as far as the diagnostic upper GI endoscopy is concerned, the tip of the endoscopy looks upwards. Okay, that is what important. So you are able to look up when your big wheels come towards you. That's the most important. The next important thing is a soft movement. Here is the part of the scope which is outside the patient mouth. You hold it about 10 centimeter away from the patient mouth, like holding a pen. And clockwise, anti-clockwise, you can torque or twist the scope. If you go clockwise, what is red arrow shows, that is you are turning towards the right side, that is towards 3 o'clock. If you are going anti-clockwise, like towards the green, then you are going looking at the 9 o'clock position, that is to the left. So like that, you will be able to do this also. Endoscopy is a teamwork. So the fourth tip is about the 4 people here standing along with you in the endoscopy theater. 1, the restraining the nurse with the mouth guard. This is restraining the patient and also witnessing the patient's vitals, assisting you with all the accessories. Number 4, she is helping in the recording and also helps to get some drugs from the theater outside. So all these people's role play, you should know. And the one person who is holding the patient's head is by far important, keeping the patient in the neutral position with the head in the neutral without undue twisting. And also see how she holds with a victory sign of her hand, holding the mouth guard, supporting her occiput, patient's occiput, so that he is not having an unnecessary extension of the head. The mouth guard should be of various sizes. So even if you have a patient with trismus, you should have an appropriate mouth guard. So all these are all tiny practical tips. The tip number 5, I would say, most of the people, the first few cases, they find it difficult to intubate the cricopharynx because you want to just have a glimpse of the vocal cords, but you need to go somewhere here, post-cricoid region. If you go here, like a bronchoscopy, you'll be doing, and it is very, very uncomfortable for the patient. So what you need to do is keep the endoscopy at the center. You take the scope like this with a gentle curvature, with the big wheel towards you like that. You'll be able to see first at 12 o'clock in the top of the screen, the tongue, the bottom of the screen, the uvula and the soft palate. And if you go further in, you will have a glimpse of epiglottis. And if you go further, you'll be able to see and talk at 15 centimeter from the incisor or teeth, the endoscopy marking, if you see, you'll be seeing the vocal cords, arytenoid fold, piriform fossa here, the right side and left side. But you have to go in the post-cricoid region, especially through the left piriform fossa here or exactly at the midline. You keep the endoscopy tip, then you can slide the scope as the patient is asked to take a swallow. Sometimes it is difficult to go to that area, maybe because the patient is having a post-cricoid web in a case of lumbar-Vincent syndrome, or a tumor there like a post-cricoid stricture, or even a case of a rare case of Zenker's diverticulum, where the diverticulum will be there posteriorly. Every time the scope goes through this blind pouch, not going through this anterior opening. In those difficulty in intubation at the cricopharynx, you remember what anesthetists they do when they have a difficulty with intubation. They go for a Bugey directed intubation. Similarly, you can put a guide wire with a flexi-tip metallic guide wire through the access channel. You pass it beyond your endoscopy tip, put it through the piriform fossa, pass it well into the esophagus, and then slide your endoscopy over it. So that way you can easily even dilate and stretch the post-cricoid web. The next tip, the sixth tip is try to get into the stomach. The stomach is a roomy organ. Very often you get lost, waste a lot of time trying to find the pylorus. The best way to reach the pylorus at the shortest time is through the longest route. That is through the long route along the greater curvature. How will you do that? As soon as you enter the stomach, you see where you enter the body. The fundus is not seen as on your way in. And you go and have this greater curvature all the way. Even though it is a bit longer, it will be the surest way to reach. If you watch this picture here I have given you, if you just navigate along the greater curvature, which is usually seen in the monitor at 6 o'clock position. 6 o'clock greater curve, then this lesser curve is at 12 o'clock. Anterior wall is at 6 o'clock. If you put your hand and press the anterior abdominal wall, you can see the indentation of your finger at the 9 o'clock. And posteriorly, the pancreatic cyst will be peeping at the 3 o'clock. So all this you know. So you enter and then you do these three important maneuvers with your hand, control head. 3 times you will be getting into the pylorus. What are these? Big wheel towards you, clockwise twist with your talking, okay, and then push the scope about 5 centimeter. Repeat the same 3 things about 2 or 3 times. Slowly you will navigate upwards and to the right, upwards and to the right by these 2 steps, and you will be staring at the pylorus like this. You go a little closer, make sure the pylorus is straight in front of you, facing end facing, okay, like this. Then you can easily enter. If the pylorus is at the center, you are ready to enter. If it is down facing, side facing, it is very, very difficult to enter. You enter the duodenum. Duodenal bulb is featureless. D2 is having a valvulae convenatis or a horizontal mucosal folds. Starting from D1, where the ulcers are seen, entering the D2 is tricky for the beginner because you need to go from the bulbar duodenum to post-bulbar duodenum, find a place called the superior duodenal angle before you do an important 3 steps to enter the D2. So what is superior duodenal angle? If you watch this, here is a duodenal bulb. This is the descending duodenum. This is the duodenal, superior duodenal angle here. So your tip of the scope should be right at the superior duodenal angle. Only then you have to do these 3 important things. If you do beforehand in the duodenal bulb, you will not enter the D2 easily. So what are those 3 things you do when you reach the superior duodenal angle? Again the same thing. Big wheel towards you, small wheel away from you, or torque the scope clockwise. But in addition, you have to do an additional movement that is called the body movement. In other words, going from D1 to D2 depends upon wheel movement and also hand movement and also your body movement to the right. In other words, you screw your body itself like a screwdriver. It turns away from the patient, looking towards the patient's monitor, like I am now looking at the monitor, not looking at the patient. Then you go clockwise twist of the scope and then big wheel towards you. Then you pull the scope from long route to short route by pulling up to 60 centimeter. This is what we call a paradoxically movement. You will be able to hug the lesser curve now and you are able to see the ampulla vata. Then if you pull any further than 60 centimeter, the scope will fall onto the stomach, and in the stomach, the big wheel, you go gradually towards you. Then slowly at the tip of the scope becomes like a J. The beginning, you will see the incisura. That is the first structure you do see on the along the lesser curvature as you bring the big wheel towards you. Incisura stretching from the 8 o'clock to 2 o'clock. Next, you will see the body. Next, the fundus as you do the J maneuver. And the last thing you will see is the cardia. This is the crest of the diaphragm portion. So all you will be seeing the rotation of your body, rotation of the scope 360 degree. Then the last final thing I would say is you have to do a distension and deflation repeatedly to see whether the patient has a good distensible stomach. Linitis plastica will lose its distensibility character, whereas a normal stomach will easily distend, all the rugal folds disappear, then on deflation, they'll all reappear. So that is the important thing. The last tip I would give, throughout the procedure, don't just rely on this pulse oximeter. You have to be vigilant. Keep an eye on the patient, whether the patient is struggling or patient is holding, breath holding. What is my staff nurse, they are reassuring or not. And also I usually advise you all administer the patient nasal O2 so that the patient is able to tolerate the endoscopy very well. And there are some occasions where you may have to have anesthetist, like a children doing endoscopy, you need an anesthetist. Keep the defibrillator or resuscitation team ready in case of any problems during endoscopy. Endoscopy is like an operation, you have to be vigilant throughout. And after each endoscopic procedure, make sure it is well disinfected before you use to the next patients. So safety of the patient is important, and also safety of our staff, especially in the COVID-19 era, safety of the equipments by maintaining and drying it, hanging it in the your cupboard, they're all equally important for you. So ladies and gentlemen, so all these 10 important tips, what I just said, they are not just shortcut to success, they are quick time to success. If you follow them all, you'll be able to swiftly, quickly, confidently do the endoscopy wherein the patient is comfortable. You are also able to complete the procedure without missing a lesion, and you are able to identify each and every pathology and able to describe them in the standard medical terminology. That is what expected for everyone doing a good upper GI endoscopy. Thank you. I'm waiting for your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Iswaramurthy, for a very lucid presentation on tips and tricks in upper GI endoscopy. You are a master of that endoscopy procedures, very therapeutic procedures also. Nice to have you actually again for the MIS Con this year. Over to chairpersons, Dr. Sudhanshu.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the tips and tricks, the endoscopy. Actually, nowadays, so many surgeons are started their career in the endoscopy, and definitely these tips and tricks will be very useful for them. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Dr. Sulfi.
Yes, for any upper GI surgeon, endoscopy is a basic and essential investigation tool. All surgeons should know the basics of doing endoscopy. Dr. Iswaramurthy from Lotus Hospital beautifully described the basics and the important points for that. Thank you very much for the nice talk. Thank you.
Sir.
Dr. Vinod, do you want to make a comment now? Is it better, your net? Right. I think we are not really hearing Dr. Vinod because we are actually familiar with endoscopy. We are able to do the intragastric balloon procedures. We don't do usual endoscopy. Diagnostic ones are done by our gastroenterology colleagues, but because we are running a bariatric program, we are doing the endoscopic balloon placement as well as removal. So it's wise learning. It's better. You have some experience in endoscopy that has been absolutely demonstrated by Dr. Iswaramurthy. Thank you, Dr. Iswaramurthy, for the wonderful presentation. We will go ahead with the Dr. Munir Khan. Dr. Munir Khan will be presenting on laparoscopic or retroperitoneoscopic pyelolithotomy. Or as all of you know, he hails from Srinagar Kidney and Urological Disease Research Center, Indian Hernia Society's president, CELSI president. All those he has been very much closely associated with the surgical training programs, and he has visited Cochin also for various programs. This time we are going to hear from him directly from Srinagar. Over to Dr. Munir Khan.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah, please, Dr. Munir.
Good evening to everybody, chairpersons, and thank you for the opportunity to present this talk. And we can go to the first slide, please.
we are just going ahead with your.
See, retroperitoneum is altogether a different procedure. And the picture is also very different. There are not many landmarks in there.
Yeah.
And the essence of it is the making of the space. Next slide, please. This is a large pelvic calculi, and you see there are some calycial calculi too. And the large calculi can either be dealt by PCNL, which 90% of the people would do, and very few will go for a retroperitoneal pylorithotomy. Next slide, please. Slide, please. Laparoscopy, pylorithotomy, there is no injury to the parenchyma, no trauma. Every step is under vision. There is no radiation exposure as you have in PCNL. There is no risk of uncontrolled hemorrhage as you have in PCNL. Volume overload and sepsis which you see after PCNL is not there. Slide, please. Video. See, the essence of this retroperitoneal that you got to make the space properly. And if you are able to make the space properly, then there's not a problem. Here we take the first port, that is a telescope at the tip of the 12th rib. Just in the mid-axillary line. We widen it with a hemostat and then we put a finger in. And we dissect the space, whatever is available. This is, now at the moment, we are extragerotal, outside the gerotofascia, but we have gone through the posterior layer of the lumbar fascia. We put the balloon dilator, and we inflate the balloon dilator. About 30 puffs usually, and it gives a bulge over there. This helps in formation of the space. And we retain the balloon for about 2 minutes so that you have hemostasis. Retention of the balloon for 2 minutes gives you good hemostasis. Thereafter, the balloon is taken out, and we do make the other two ports, the working ports, under finger guidance because we believe it's much faster. And they're all in the reach of the pulp of the finger, about 8 centimeters apart. This is at the anterior superior iliac spine, and the other port is at the renal angle. Another 8 centimeters, 8 to 9 centimeters away from this port. So now placing those two ports, now we place the telescopic port, and we have a cone in there, and we screw the cone on the so that to prevent the gas leak. And we also fix this port with a stitch. So after developing the space, retroperitoneal space, this is a patient with a large calculi with the bulk of the stone is in the pelvis, and we are going by the retroperitoneal approach. And we trace all the psoas muscle, you go onto the ureter, and you trace the ureter up. Now you can see endo knifing be used as you have dissected out and cleared the pelvis. Make an oblique or a transverse incision on the pelvis. The quality of, there's no peritoneum, the shine will not be there, the reflection of light will not be there. So the picture may not be as good as what you have in the transperitoneal approach. We believe that all the pylorithotomy should be done by a retroperitoneal approach and not by the transperitoneal. Here we have got one of the stones out, and the other part of the stone is also coming out. Do we have the sound, please? Can we have the sound? Partially closed, rather. And the flexible endoscope is passed. Flexible nephroscope is passed. video nephroscope this is, and you can visualize
There's a lot of disturbance. So you can have the sound off and
This was
alto.
the calyceal stone which
You can see
earlier.
there is a calyceal stone,
Now through this
and we are passing the flexible nephroscope inside. And this stone was in the calyx, one of the calyx as we saw in the IBP. And we are lasing the stone out. So after taking out the bulk of the stone by laparoscopy pylorithotomy, small calyceal stones cannot be left behind. So here you pass the nephroscope, flexible nephroscope into the calyx, desired calyx, and you lase it up with the laser and forms dust and comes out. Here you can use a wider fiber, 600 micron laser fiber, so that the disintegration is much faster of the stone. The wide bore of the nephroscope allows the laser fiber to 600 micron laser fiber to go in. Here are the stones which we could get, and the small stone has been laced. This is another patient with the here also the bulk of the stone lies in the pelvis. So wherever the bulk of the stone is in the pelvis, one could go by this procedure. And the advantage here is you don't need a C-arm, you don't need sophisticated equipment. You have this in the lab coli set everywhere in the periphery. All you need is one endo knife extra. Otherwise, all the instruments are the same. We close after inspection again, we close the pelvis with interrupted sutures. We pass a stent in all cases. Here is the flexible nephroscope is passed for the inspection of the interior, and now the stent you see is going down. And then you close the incision has been partially closed, and then you need to close the incision partially before you put in the nephroscope, because you need to distend the pelvis. Another patient, this is Stagon calculus is infected. You see another the stone in this here in the lower calyx, which may not be able to take by a simple pylorithotomy. This has also hydronephrosis, so it would be pretty easy to do a PCNL, especially in a hydronephrotic kidney. We go over the psoas muscle. And here the pelvis is intrarenal. The pelvis is internal. We may with the endo knife, we may make an endo incision and continue. We get the most of the bulk of the stone out with the cup forceps. You can give a wash also, but anyway, if you have to. Now, in the first case, we broke the calyceal stone with a laser. Here, after getting the bulk of the stone out, now all this, since it's extraperitoneal approach, you can just wash it, clean it, and all the bulk of and suck it out. If you were doing it in the peritoneum, you will lose all the fragments. Here you see there's a large stone still left behind. And in this case, we have used the nephroscope, the rigid nephroscope through one of the ports. You pass the nephroscope through one of the ports and you use the lithoclast. You can use the straight rod to break the stone. The stone is broken into small fragments and removed. Some of them can be sucked out if you have the shock pulse available. Nowadays we have it available. It breaks the stone as well as sucks it. So you don't have to pick up the fragments in those cases. We're using shock pulse.
This was an earlier video, so that point of time we did not have the shock pulse available. And you see the kidney is being completely cleared. The calyx is cleared of the stone. You can pick up most of the stones, even in the extraperitoneal space, retroperitoneal space. Here the pelvis is being closed transversely. You see here, the difficulty was that there was not a large extrarenal pelvis in this case. It was most of the pelvis was intrarenal. And that's why we had to use the nephroscope to remove the calycial part. And here is the outside part which has been removed. You can remove it by the same port, the telescopic port, because that is the largest, about 1.5 centimeters. This is the stent placed post-operatively on the table, and these are the stone fragments removed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
So retroperitoneal pyelonephrectomy is a viable option in place of PCNL, and is available as instruments for this are available even in the periphery, where in a lab set and all you would need a endo knife. And no radiations to exposure to the patient, not to the surgeon. That's the advantage. And the dreaded complication of PCNL is not there. The hemorrhage is not there. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for the wonderful exposition of the topic. Any more comments? Singh, past president. Sorry, the mic was off. Dr. Virendra Singh, past president of CELSI. Dr. Vikas Gupta, board member, Indian Hernia Society, and Dr. P.K. Mohan from Amala Medical College, Thrissur. So the topic is difficult cholecystectomy by Dr. Pavaninder Lal. As all of you are aware, he is the professor of surgery and chairman of Minimal Invasive Surgery Center at Maulana Azad Medical College, Delhi, and currently he is the executive director of National Board of Examinations. Very happy to have Dr. Pavaninder Lal again on screen, not in person here, to present a topic, difficult lap cholecystectomy. Over to Dr. Pavaninder Lal.
Good evening, Dr. Padma, and good evening to all the chairpersons and to the membership and delegates of this fantastic meeting that we have been witnessing over the past 2 days. Absolute delight to be a part of it once again in some very high quality live workshop as well as live transmission that we were able to see. So, and thank you once again for giving me this opportunity to present this work on difficult cholecystectomy. I bring greetings from my institution, both at MAMC and at the National Board. So, without further delay, it has been clearly seen that despite so many years of laparoscopic cholecystectomy having been established, biometric injuries still are a reality, and they are still being reported in significant numbers, although the trend is that it has now become at a stable number, almost 3 to 1,000 procedures. And because they are infrequent, definitive studies comparing methods to minimize these complications are very difficult to be performed. So there is no randomized controlled trial to say what is good. So there have to be broad guidelines. We know that there is enough abnormality in the anatomy of the cystic duct, cystic artery, make it at high risk for various kinds of complications. And we are also knowing that there are some guidelines from the SAGES, from the Tokyo, and we are very proud that the CELSI guidelines have also now been published, and they are form a very important part of our knowledge. There are various ways in which we can visualize the biliary tree preoperatively through a magnetic resonance cholangiopancreatography if there is a doubt, and then intraoperative cholangiography, of course, has not become very popular. So the broad technique that we use to reduce bile duct injury is to use the critical view of safety method, whereas we must see the cystic duct and the artery during laparoscopic cholecystectomy, and only then we are going to ligate any ductular structure that is connected to the main common hepatic duct forming the common bile duct. The other anatomical landmark that is also described is the Ruvius sulcus, and we are supposed to stay anterior to that transverse line, which is shown in blue, so that we are clear of the common bile duct, which is normally the case where you get Ruvius sulcus seen, although it may not be present in a good 33% of the patients. Clearing of the cholecystohepatic triangle is something that is mandatory, and unless and until we see this broad anterior and posterior window with only two structures entering the gallbladder, no division should actually be done. So without further ado, I would like to start this clip. Now, this was a 36-year-old lady who had presented with multiple episodes of pain in the right hypochondrium, attacks of cholecystitis, and then this patient, as you can see, the whole omentum is stuck. There is no fundus of the gallbladder seen.
Hello.
So we are using the monopolar hook to dissect the fundus of the gallbladder and remove the omental attachments to the fundus. So there could be two types of difficulties. One, where you don't see gallbladder, either it is completely adherent at the fundus or it is adherent at the calyx and you don't understand the anatomy at the calyx. You may have one of the two. Either there may be difficulty at the fundus and then the calyx may be easy, or you may have difficulty in the calyx, the fundus was well seen, or if it is a really bad day, then you could have both of them together. So as you can see, very careful dissection using a combination of harmonic and monopolar has been used to dissect very carefully. This is transverse colon can be at risk. So dense adhesions which are present are being brought down, and then as you can see, this it is possible now. This was a pyocele, so the pus is being aspirated out. And our policy is that we do not always think it is essential to remove the gallbladder. If one is not able to make a progress, then one can just simply stop here at this stage, convert it to a cholecystostomy, and come out and come back after 6 weeks. But here, as you can see, we were able to make a progress, and dissection was continued using harmonic here, and now the hook is being used to expose the ductular structures very carefully, picking up layer by layer, because the anatomy is still not very clear. You do not know what is happening. There is fibrosis at the cholecystohepatic area. Hook and the blunt tip of the suction sometimes is a very good instrument to make a plane. Now some vessels are getting to be seen. One can see the common bile duct, which has also started to come in the exposure. It is a good idea to get a gauze inside and use it to dab, and take your time, because this is one area where one needs to get really slow, open the window of the anterior leaf of the peritoneum. Now here, the important thing was there were branches which was coming from the posterior side. So the posterior hepatic arteries, the posterior cystic artery, posterior branch of the cystic the first, so that there is no tearing, because sometimes there can be a very huge bleeding from this area, and a good posterior window is being created by division of this very thick peritoneal flap, and then the gallbladder is taken laterally again, and the anterior flap is dissected. Once that is done, you can see the cystic artery and the duct are well seen. They have been clipped. We use 3 clips on the duct and 2 on the artery on the patient side. And then slowly the dissection can proceed. So as you can see, this was not, this was difficult to begin with when we saw the fundus area, but it was not that challenging, although any part of the step can go wrong. So one needs to be very, very slow and take due precautions in making sure. Now, such a fibrous gallbladder with a pyocele, sometimes it is easy to get into the liver, and the hepatic plate is not protected. It gets opened up, and then one gets into bleeding from the liver. So that's another thing that one needs to be cautious about. So this was the one case which I thought was important. The gallbladder we normally try to retrieve in a bag whenever there is a large gallbladder, or we have made a hole on the fundus. We don't want the pus dripping in the hole of the abdomen. So I hope you were able to see the video. We've got a small clip which follows this of another case, which was of a male patient. Once again, repeated attacks, and as you can see, dense adhesions. Once again, suction cannula being used as an instrument for blunt dissection, and the progress was made only because we were able to make a progress with subsequent dissection. If you are not able to make a progress, you would need to stop. So this is another, as you can see, you don't have any idea where the calyx is as of now. And then slowly we were able to go, and now a decision was taken that because we do not know, partial cholecystectomy, leaving the Hartmann's area and removing the stones, so that we are not, so that is the other recommended step now, which has now come up very clearly in the Tokyo guidelines, as well as those which are in the CELSI guidelines, that if we are not able to get to the get to define the calyx, I thought it is very important for the surgeons to see that the stone can then be delivered from this, and rather than making a mess at the level of the undefined calyx area, one can go and go a little bit distal and close the lumen now, because it will be much wider than normal by 2 or 3 sutures. So surgeons who want to do this must be proficient in doing intracorporeal suturing work, and it is absolutely fine now to say that you have done, I would not say partial cholecystectomy, but maybe gallbladder removal with a cuff of the gallbladder remaining near the cystic duct, so that we are clear of the common hepatic duct and the common bile duct junction, and no injury would have been done to the ductular major structures. And as you can see here, the dissection very clearly shows that how inflamed this gallbladder was, and it would have been perfectly fine as an exit measure to just convert this to a cholecystostomy and come back later. that is absolutely fine. And it is important that whenever we do this procedure, we use a whiteboard drain. You can see the stones that were spilled or removed from the remnant of the cuff of the cystic duct were picked up. So, how to prevent any infection of gallbladder plane in the Callett's triangle area, and identifying its boundaries, creating the critical view of safety is of paramount importance. If there is any persistent hemorrhage, one must achieve hemostasis by compression, but rather than using any excessive cautery or clipping it in a panic situation. If there is severe fibrosis and scarring in the Callett's triangle due to inflammation, or if there is an impacted gallstone in the confluence, one should stop and reconsider whatever is happening, take stock of the situation. Guidance to stopping should be if you are not able to see the critical view of safety and the Callett's triangle is not well seen. What are the alternative strategies? Conversion to open should never be taken as a defeat. It should be taken as a sound surgical decision. Subtotal or partial cholecystectomy, which is what I had shown you just now. Fundus first is a dome down technique that can be done to very commonly done by surgeons to reach the cystic duct. If you are not able to go retrograde, which is the normal way we normally do the cholecystectomy, and then cholecystostomy, where drainage only is the procedure. So to conclude, chairpersons, safe cholecystectomy needs identification of critical view of safety. Only two structures connecting the gallbladder to the biliary tree. 1/3 of the gallbladder should be lifted off the cystic plate before we do any clipping. There should not be any panic reaction in case of bleeding, and we should not hesitate to convert to open if there is any doubt. It is not important to resort to cholecystectomy. It is acceptable to do a lesser procedure like a subtotal cholecystectomy or a cholecystostomy. Thank you very much once again for this very kind invitation, Dr. Padma, and many congratulations to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lal. Wonderful exposition of the difficult cholecystectomy, because you have a large experience of different modes of cholecystectomy. We were enlightened by your presentation. Over to chairpersons. Dr. Surendra Singh, sir, you can talk. Sir, unmute Dr. Surendra Singh. Yeah, please, sir.
Hello.
Yeah, you are audible, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Padma. Thank you very much, and congratulations to you for organizing such a wonderful conference. The topic presented by Dr. Lal is very relevant to all the surgeons, since cholecystectomy is the most commonly performed surgery by all the surgeons, and young surgeons will start with this operation first. And we have to avoid complications, and the Mool Mantra for that is, as already emphasized by Dr. Lal, is that we must define the structures. That there are only two tubular structures which are connecting the gallbladder to the common bile duct and to the vascular structures. That is the cystic duct and cystic artery. They must be defined beyond any possibility of any doubt. And he has already laid stress on critical view of safety. Very well presented. I congratulate Dr. Lal for such a nice presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your kind words.
Sir, Dr. Lal, there is a question. If there is a portal hypertension, what will be your take?
Yeah, so firstly, whether you are able to find out whether there is portal hypertension preoperatively, then one should be very cautious and completely do the workup for the condition of the liver, because you are going to run into some trouble. I'll tell you, we had very interesting cases that came to us for evaluation. These patients with portal hypertension, people think have only got problem around the Callett's area. It's not true. You will also have problem around the umbilicus. When you are introducing your first port, there are sometimes these very prominent vessels which are which may cause bleeding later on. Of course, there will be bleeding, risk of bleeding from the cirrhotic liver if that is the cause, or the collateral vessels which are formed around the porta. So I would say if there is a patient which we know preoperatively, I would assess him very carefully. What is the urgency for surgery? What is the merit of doing surgery? Is it just an incidental gallstone finding, or the patient is indeed symptomatic? If the patient is symptomatic, I would take that patient very carefully after full investigation, doing the upper GI endoscopy and being ready for all the catastrophe that can happen. And we know you are going carefully. If otherwise you go inside and find portal hypertension as a surprise, you find a cirrhotic liver, which is not very uncommon. You may find a fibrotic gallbladder. You may find, incidental finding inside of prominent vessels. Then your take can be according to the experience and expertise that you have. If you think you are not, if you are early in your career, there is no problem in coming out and sending this patient to another senior surgeon. If you are a qualified surgeon with a huge number of laparoscopic cases under your belt and your infrastructure in the hospital is good and you have a blood bank facility, only then should you progress to opening up the Calitz triangle, in which case one needs to go very slowly and one would need to consider doing the gallbladder removal from the gallbladder bed very carefully. So there are going to be challenges for a case where there is presence of portal hypertension. It is something that has to be taken with a very, very experienced surgeon in a very good institution. Otherwise, one can easily land up into huge amount of trouble.
Thank you, Dr. Lal, for those words of wisdom. Thank you once again.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, we will move ahead with the next lecture, that is TEP for inguinal hernia from Dr. K.N. Srivastava, beloved surgeon, very good friend. He is a consultant surgeon at BLK Super Specialty Hospital, New Delhi. He has been closely associated with the Indian Hernia Society and CELSI for the past several years. Sir, we are very happy to have Dr. K.N. Srivastava to present his topic on TEP for inguinal hernia.
Thank you, Dr. Padma. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
TEP repair is understanding the endoscopy cannot.
I would like to kindly stop for a minute, is possible?
Yeah, please, sir. I'll just rewind the presentation. You can speak, sir.
Please do that. Yeah, for the safety of this, time which was allotted to me, I thought I'll put a video so that time is not lost. So I'll do that. But before that, I'd just like to compliment Dr. Padma, Dr. Madhukar Pai, and the team for an excellent conference. I can tell you, nobody could have imagined the type of cases which we had, the type of quality of the video, quality of the audio, and really it was a fantastic conference, and I'm sure that every one of us has benefited the most. So before we proceed, then I think I'd like you to start this video because I have given already voiceover to save the time. So I think we can just start that.
Thank you, sir, for the nice words. We are going ahead with the video.
From BLK Super Specialty Hospital in New Delhi. The first step in TEP repair is understanding the endoscopic anatomy. And the important landmarks are pubic symphysis, Cooper's ligament, iliopubic tract, inferior gastric vessels, vas deferens, and testicular vessels. The area between vas deferens and testicular vessels is triangle of Doom, which has external iliac artery and vein. So these large vessels are at risk if you are not very careful in this area. Lateral to this triangle of Doom is triangle of pain, which is the area where few important nerves are there. So you have to avoid putting any tack during this procedure in this area. Now, the instruments which are important is S retractor and the Hussen's cannula. Patient's position is supine with both arms tucked by the side of the body. The working ports are 3. They are all in the midline. Now, coming to the procedure proper, we give an infraumbilical about 12 to 15 millimeter size incision slightly off the midline. Exposing the anterior sheath, we give a transverse incision in the anterior sheath, and the 2 lips of anterior sheath, they are held by stay sutures taking one ovicral, you can see that we take 2 stay sutures, and after taking these 2 stay sutures, we retract the rectus muscle laterally. Now, once you retract this rectus muscle laterally, then you can see the posterior rectus sheath behind, and this is the area where you have to enter. What I do, I put obturator of the Hudson cannula to create a space, and in this space I put a indigenous balloon and take it up to the pubic symphysis area and put about 125 ml of saline to create this space. This saline is there for about 2 to 3 minutes to make the hemostasis, and then the saline is taken out and the balloon which was put inside is also taken out. Now, after that, in this area, taking posterior rectus sheath as a guide, we put Hudson's cannula in position. You can see that Hudson's cannula is being put there, and the 2 stay sutures will be used to fix this Hudson cannula. You can see I am using 1.5 knots so that if I am in a wrong place, I can reuse these 2 stay sutures. Now, once inside, we just put the 2 working ports as described earlier, and the first step to be seen is the pubic symphysis. You can see in the midline, and once you have seen that, then you go laterally and see the Cooper's ligament as the second structure. This was a case of indirect inguinal hernia. So once we enter inside, create a space, we are going laterally. You can see that this is the posterior layer of fascia transversalis, and you make a space in that, and you go into the Bouguereau space, which is the lateral space. So this is the step which has to be done before you start dissecting the indirect inguinal hernia sac. So you have to remember that first you have to create the lateral space of Bouguereau, and then you start dissecting the indirect inguinal hernial sac. You can see that I'm just still creating lateral space of Bouguereau. Later I'll reach up to the lateral limit of dissection. Now coming to the indirect inguinal hernial sac, which is lying anterolateral to the cord structures. It's a white glistening structure. You can see that this indirect sac has to be dissected from the cord structures. You can see I am going all around the indirect sac, and in this process I am separating it from the testicular vessel and vas deferens. Now you have reached the limit of the circumferential dissection. Now once you have reached this limit, now you have seen that I am holding the indirect sac. It will be dissected further till the infundibulum of the sac if it is a small or medium sized hernia. But if it is a larger hernia, then you have to dissect as much laterally as possible. You can see it was a big one, so I am just dissecting the distal portion of the indirect sac. And in this procedure, you can see I'll just use, just like climbing the rope ladder, the 2 instruments are being used like that. And once you have reached enough, then the indirect sac in this case is divided distally. The distal end is left open, and the proximal end will be just either you can use a suture or you can use an endoloop to close this proximal end. Now this herniotomy has been done, and after this herniotomy comes the parietalization. Parietalization is the dissection of the hernial sac and the adjacent peritoneum from the cord and the retroperitoneum. Now you can see that I am going up to the lateral limit of dissection, which is the anterior superior iliac spine. You can see my finger is pushing from outside, and I have made sure that I have reached up to the lateral limit of dissection, which is the anterior superior iliac spine. The medially you have to go up to the about 1 centimeter beyond the pubic symphysis. Superior dissection is up to the arcuate line, and inferior dissection is 5 centimeter below the deep ring. Now coming to the parietalization proper, you can see that this adjacent peritoneum, which is adjacent to the hernial sac, is being separated from the retroperitoneum and the testicular vessels. This is exactly what we want to do. This whole area is just being dissected, and we have to dissect it 5 centimeter below the deep ring or till the cord turns medially. So that is the limit up to which you have to do parietalization. So that is an important step of surgery, because if you have not done enough parietalization, there is a possibility of recurrence. Once it has been done, you are sure that parietalization is complete. Then comes the preparation of the mesh. We take 15 by 15 mesh, cut it into 15 to 13, and 2/3 of the mesh is folded, and we put 2 sutures in this mesh. After you have put these 2 sutures, then you further roll this mesh like a cigarette, and this is put inside through the 10 mm port, which was the telescopic port. And once this is inside the area of surgery, then you will just unfold it gradually. So first the 1/3 of mesh which was not sutured will be unfolded. You can see that. Laterally you have to go into the area of Bogros, and medially you have to go up. You can see that what I am doing is that the lower edge of the mesh has to be below the peritoneum. So that is also an important step, because if peritoneum goes anterior to the mesh, then that is also one cause of the recurrence. Now once it has been split, then we put 2 tacks just above the Cooper's ligament and near the pubic symphysis. Then we just cut down these 2 vital sutures which were put to roll the mesh, and then mesh is unrolled just like a carpet. So by this, the whole of the mesh will be covering the total myopectineal Fouchard's area, and that is the possibility of recurrence is just not there. So once it is there, then you just close the incision which you had been made. The 2 stay sutures are just tied together to close the anterior sheath, and just after that you put the tacks, and that's the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Very comfortable dissection you made on that TEP. We will listen to the comments.
Well, I told you that because of the trying to stick to the time frame, I made this video so that we remain in the time frame also, and the important steps are not lost.
Yeah.
So I did try to show all the important.
When you share the video, clarity is too good, very good. HD quality we could see, and your voice, everything is clear, and people could understand.
Dr. Srivastava.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Sir, you are master of hernia surgery, and you make the thing appear to be so simple.
Thank you very much.
I always enjoy the surgery when it is done by you, and that is the quality of a good teacher who makes the difficult thing appear to be so simple and motivate the learners. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. You know, it is my pet subject, I must tell you. I have started since year 2000. I gave my PG a thesis on this in 2000, and since then I must have completed more than 2000 cases. And touch wood, God has been very kind, and really it is very close to my heart.
Sir, we know you are one of the leaders in the country in this kind of surgery.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Anybody else would like to make a comment? Please raise your hand. We can unmute. Dr. MP Singh.
Yeah, excellent presentation, Dr. Srivastava.
Thank you.
I do remember you did a workshop on hernia at GSVM Medical College, Kanpur.
Yeah.
When I was there as an associate professor. So I do remember those 2 days you were with us. And thank you, Dr. Padma, for everything. You have provided a good academic feast to all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you once again. Thank you once again, Dr.
Bilateral.
Dr. Madhukar and team. It was a really worth remembering conference, and I can tell you, since we had been devoid of any conference for such a long time, it came as a very big, relief and very good time.
I'm yet to visit Kerala and Kochi, and I will meet Padma and Dr. Madhukar and all that team, and then I'll really be happy that day.
Dr. NP Singh, once you have not wished or you have not reached Kochi with Dr. Padma, I think you are missing something very great. It's a really wonderful time to have with Dr. Padma and Dr. Madhukar Pai.
Yeah,
I have
yes,
been there thrice
sir.
before, and I still remember those memories. Thank you very much. once again.
That's my firm opinion now. Thank
Sure.
you very much.
For all conferences, Dr. Srinivas was there, and he will very abundantly encourage us. And the moment we do a good procedure, he will make sure that he is encouraging us. Phone up, message, and sir, thank you so much. Thank you for having this.
But Padma, I always tell the truth. If I like it, then only I'll appreciate. I'll never appreciate unnecessarily. And the way you have conducted yourself, the surgeries which you have done, really very clear audio, very clear video, and just to the point by you, by Madhukar, and by so many other faculties which you have chosen. It was really a treat to eyes. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. We are just going to have a conclusion of the very successful program in this difficult time. We were really tensed till actually today afternoon, we can say, and all these COVID problems and other issues because it's on a new platform. We were not sure how the surgeries will be there from other places. But for God's grace in abundance, as you said, everything went on very smoothly. I'm very happy. I just want a minute of all of you because we have, even at this point of time, we have almost like 100 surgeons listening to your talks, our messages, everything. So the cooperation from the entire surgical community has been immense. It was ably supported by the Society of Endoscopic Laparoscopic Surgeons of India, Indian Hernia Society, or Berwenden Institute of Laparoscopic Surgery Training, Keyhole Clinic Kochi, then VPS Lakeshore Hospital Kochi, and Association of Surgeons of India Kerala chapter. So all the surgical fraternity has supported, all the institutions we are associated with has been immensely supporting us, and we had a wonderful team to support myself because Dr. Madhukar Pai, he is with me for so many years, and he has been actually looking after the academic content of it, those who are sending the video, everything. So we had flawless program going on. Dr. Farish was assisting in our cases because we knew once he is there around, we can relax and do it because we were engaged with the procedures, and he had backup support. Subin was the person who created the website, brochures, and all other creative promos for this program because entire communication was through the e-format. Then we have Premna. She has the overall control of things. International faculty has been contacted only by her, but we could manage to get so many international faculties, sponsorship support, overall in charge, and the conduct of the conference as usual has been very ably, excellently managed by Premna. Then we have our NIMI OP coordinator who actually arranged patients. Our managers, Sandhya has done a very good job of communicating with faculty and follow-up, informing everybody for their presentations in time. We had Deepa, who has just recently joined. She was also supporting for the communication aspect. Manish, as usual, has done his job very excellently well. Overall backup support and logistic support, everything has been done by Manish. Then OT staff, Lakeshore team, actually management has supported us to conduct this event in this difficult time. We really appreciate their sincere cooperation in this regard. All arrangements they could actually allow us to go ahead, though from our side Premna was managing all the logistics things, but the management support has been excellent. OT, Sarin, Asha and other OT staff and supportive staff have been very, very forthcoming to see that this program is successfully conducted. IT support from Mr. Chandrasekharan and Rakesh and team has been excellent. We had no major problem at all. Maybe less than a minute only we had issue of maybe even the image drop. So maintenance team, security, housekeeping, F&B by Rakesh, Sibin, all those that they have done. And you have seen the audio visual has been excellent, and it was appreciated by Anand team also when we are having the conferencing communication from Coimbatore. Audio visual by Mr. Arun Moses and team. What's your name? I forgot. Another Arun Kumar and Arun Moses, both of them did a fantastic job of having a flawless audio visual, and that too on a new platform. Events Guru was taken care by Mr. Rajil Das, son and daughter, isn't it? Ashik and Arjun. So both of them from back end they were supporting, so that on a E platform it is a control format, so that we had very good idea who is actually entering, not like unauthorized entries are well allowed. So anybody has a problem, they were really supporting. So all those things were done in a best way, and so I think we could conduct the program with the God's grace in abundance, with the support of all of you, all our seniors. We had, as I told, more than 400 participants, more than 120 faculties, 9 departments operating live, all done excellently well. And all these centers actually took pains, spent a lot of money in arranging live workshops. I would like to congratulate as well as appreciate their sincere effort. All the faculty, all the participants, our sincere gratitude to all of you. I think this is the first time in our knowledge, in the knowledge of all seniors and the audiovisual team, they were all telling this is the first time when a multi-center live workshop, and that too for 12 plus hours on both the days, conducted in the history. So we wanted to actually show the path how we can go ahead with the conferences in difficult times, even without assembling at a single point. So thank you once again, all of you. I would like to give it to Dr. Madhukar Pai for his final words, the organizing secretary.
Thanksgiving was well done by Padma Kumar sir, but one name he missed really. It is Dr. Padma Kumar himself, who is the backbone and the entire strength, because of him only everybody is working. Around him only the entire team is revolving. So his presence and his blessings only led to the success of this conference. Thank you, sir, for that.
In this 12 and a half hours, both days, I couldn't show you face at least for a minute.
Yeah.
We'll show
In fact, I was going to say
it is a mass face, otherwise face is a
That's what.
yeah.
That's what I wanted to see.
I also wanted to say the same, that Madhukar and you should be
Dr. Madhukar
few
and
seconds without mask.
Dr. Padma is.
Otherwise, our faces are so familiar, and all the senior faculty will call us by name. That is the one which actually gives us strength when we go to any part of the country. They call us by name, even our manager's name. Everybody is familiar, but this time we couldn't show because of COVID problem. So minute we are actually breaching that and showing you all the face. We are very happy. We are so lucky to have all of you. Thank you once again. We are concluding the program. Thank you. Premna, just a minute to tell thank you from your side. Just a minute.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Thanks to Dr. Padma Kumar sir and Dr. Madhukar Pai sir once again for the opportunity to include me also in this successful conference. And we are so privileged to have all the esteemed faculty, because we had nearly 100 faculties from all across globe, and we are really privileged for that. And all the delegates, we want to thank you. Thank you once again.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Many questions were there, how they can actually access to this program after the conclusion. We will be actually trying to share the videos because it's 12 hours, 12 and a half hours on both days, 25 hours of video. We may not be able to put it as such, but we will try to edit it in coming week or so, and we'll be making it available. And e-certificates will be posted to your email ID once that is prepared after checking the credentials of registration. So authorized persons will definitely get faculty and certificates. Those who have completed the FLHS will also be sent their certificates. So credit hours we actually applied for with the medical council. Unfortunately, Trivandrum was in lockdown for the past 2 weeks, and they didn't have a very specific format for this kind of conference. So our application is still there. They said they will really consider, even though the meeting is concluded. So next week we are hoping they may actually look at it. Thank you everybody once again. Good night. Jai Hind.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much.